Let's go ahead and get started with our prayers for today. As usual, we start with this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, recalling the amazing qualities of the Buddha, but moreover, that every one of us has the seed of that within ourselves, our own Buddha nature that can be completely developed into these exact same attainments that we're praising in the Buddha. So in a way, we're praising these even in ourselves in terms of our own future attainment of enlightenment. And then we'll go on to make some additional prayers of homage and then recall some of the basic teachings of the Buddha. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms' atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Then we do the short mandala offering in order to kind of create some positive potential to receive these teachings and to receive the blessings of our gurus so we can actualize these teachings. So again, visualize the entire phenomenal world transformed into a pure land, a Buddha paradise that we're offering so that, again, ourselves and all beings can attain that state where we too live in such a pure land. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then finally, we'll do the refuge and bodhicitta prayer as usual, once in English, twice in Tibetan, bringing to mind these thoughts that are encompassed in this prayer, thoughts of refuge, finding safe direction in the 3 jewels, and then also generating the motivation of bodhicitta to be here to engage in these teachings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonam gi, Dola penchir sangye drupar shok, sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonam gi, dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Okay, thank you, Mary. All right, good. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of our calm abiding practice. Again, we've been working with this topic of calm abiding, which is the essence of this perfection of concentration, the 5th perfection that we're studying currently. So again, it's perfectly fine to work with the breath as an object, and most of you use that anyway as a way of focusing the mind a bit. So if you have a technique you already use with the breath, by all means do that. If you have another object that you're using in your calm abiding practice, you can do that. But essentially, we want to try to stay present with whatever object we've chosen And this is the goal of our calm abiding practice, is to be able to stay present with that without any interruption, any distraction. But no doubt every one of us is still working on our way towards achieving that state. So when we do see through the force of our introspection that the mind has wandered away in some way, gotten distracted through various things that we might think about, be drawn to, or when we see that the mind perhaps has gotten a bit dull and fuzzy and not so clear, then at those times we want to sharpen our focus. Recall this analogy of the string of an instrument, that if it's too tight, it'll break, and if it's too loose, it won't play. So we kind of want to go back and forth between these, sort of balancing. When the mind gets too excited, then we bring the mind down. When the mind gets too loose, then we bring the mind up, and try to find that sort of middle way between those two that helps us to maintain that ideal concentration. So just work with this as best as you can over the next few minutes. We'll just do a few minutes in silence, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to strengthen our bodhicitta motivation for today's class. So now let's refresh our motivation of bodhicitta for today's class. And as I was saying earlier, in regard to the prayer of praising Shakyamuni Buddha, every one of us has Buddha nature, has the potential to develop our minds into the same state that the Buddha did. Venerable Rabina in some of her teachings often talks about an acorn as the example of this. While an acorn could be used for a lot of clever things, some kids might even use it with a slingshot to, propel it at other people. Some people might decorate them. Some people might do all sorts of things with them. But what is the potential of an acorn? The potential of an acorn is to develop into an oak tree. And if we don't acknowledge that and sort of take advantage of that, we never will see the true potential of that acorn, no matter what we use it for, until we plant it in the ground and give it all the sufficient conditions to grow and develop. We will never know the potential that exists within that acorn. Well, it's the same with regard to our own minds. Our minds have unbelievable potential that we have been blind to for countless lifetimes. Maitreya compares this to a pauper that doesn't realize that there is a precious golden statue buried under the floorboards. So they live their whole life in poverty, never knowing that they have true wealth. And this is true for every one of us. But now we've come into the influence of these amazing beings who are helping us to awaken our Buddha nature, to alert us to this fact. And every one of us has some cognizance that we do have that potential. That we need not be paupers, that we need not go from life to life not being aware of this potential, but rather that we need to acknowledge it and grow and develop it, give it all the proper causes and conditions that will help it to fully mature into the state of Buddhahood. So how amazing, how wonderful that we are aware of this. And this is the starting point, the underpinning for the mind of bodhicitta, because it acknowledges that every one of us has that potential to become fully enlightened. But moreover, it acknowledges that all beings have that potential because they are the main goal of the mind of bodhicitta, to help all of those beings to actualize their deepest potential. And again, the understanding that in order for us to do that most completely, we have to develop our own potential first. And that's why we're studying topics like the perfection of concentration and so on, is so we can use the tools that the Buddha gave us to create the causes and conditions for our own full awakening, and then lead all beings into that same state. So just take a moment to reflect on those thoughts, to really strengthen your mind of bodhicitta within that understanding of the potential that exists within yourself and all beings to become a Buddha. Okay, wonderful. Again, good to see you all. I see a hand up, but I'm not sure if that's a mistake or if someone has a question already. Marion, is that, do you have a question? I'm not sure. Sometimes those things get pressed and they're not actually having a question, so that's okay. All right, so we're working our way through the 6 perfections. Again, we have completed the first 4, and we're on the 5th one, the perfection of concentration. I've had a few classes to work through that. Let me go ahead and catch everyone up to where we're at. We're not going to do a lot of review. Oops, I think I may have, yes, I have to go back quite a ways. Let me stop the share for a moment and get that back to where it was. I was doing some additional work on some of the slides and didn't go back to the starting point for today. So again, we've been working with a number of topics within this. We started off by just simply examining the nature of concentration so that we have some idea of what this mind is and what we're trying to develop. We're essentially talking about this quality that we all do have in our minds to some degree, some level of meditative stabilization, but nonetheless, it needs to be more fully developed. So the again, working definition that we've been using for this is that concentration is a mental factor, meaning it's a factor within our minds, that is within our mental consciousness generally, that is capable of abiding one-pointedly on an object of virtue without distraction. When concentration is motivated by bodhicitta, it becomes a perfection of concentration. So again, we do see that we have moments of concentration when we are one-pointedly on something, but then we immediately jump to something else. We want to be able to sustain that. And that's what this whole practice of calm abiding is all about. So we went through the various types of concentration. We looked at the causes for achieving calm abiding, most of which we can practice right now, but we do want to have those conditions and more when we go into some formal retreat to develop calm abiding. You can go pretty far in your time outside of retreat, but to really take it to deeper levels does require some retreat time. We went through the meditation posture. Again, there's the 7 points of the meditation posture that are a handout out at the TNL's website on the materials link, the Dropbox page for this course. And then we went through time and meditation, like when do we practice? What's the duration of time we should spend? And again, getting that idea that we should have some continuity and work with smaller increments of time to develop deeper concentration, as opposed to sitting down and meditating for an hour while saying we're meditating for an hour, but we're really not meditating for that hour. We're not even focused on the object for most of that time. That's not going to be so beneficial. And then I had that. I think I went too far back. Sorry. Let me get this one more time. Let me get over here on this. Sorry, I don't know why I didn't go back to the proper place the first time, and then now the second time I did the same thing.
And the last slide that I recollect was in regard to the timing of one's meditation.
Right. And we did talk about objects last time too. I think that I thought I made these modifications to this because, we went through, there we go. Okay, I'm sorry. Now I'm on the right page. All right. I'm sorry. That's the problem with these things is when you kind of aren't staying on top of them, then they kind of take you over. Okay, so we went through the definition. Okay, the other thing that we went through last time that is on the list here, again, this is the list that has got one addition, objects of meditation. We went through the various objects that we use, and again, the advice that's generally given is to work with diminishing those tendencies that we have to certain afflictions that might be problematic when we sit down to meditate, that we should work with the antidotes to those first. So if we have a mind that has a lot of anger in it, for example, we should meditate on the antidotes to anger before we really try to deepen our meditative concentration on other objects. There are different objects suggested. The one that we tend to work with is the breath as a very easy object. Westerners benefit from this because, again, we do have an ability to kind of stay focused with something that is very easy to generate awareness of, as opposed to meditating on a visualized object such as this image of the Buddha and so on. These are wonderful objects. They have great qualities if we are able to do that. But for most of us, because we have such discursive minds, it really helps to, not engage in all that extra work of visualization and so on, but rather just to come back to the breath. So again, I'm not going to talk so much more about that because we went into that last time. The next topic that we went into that we were in the middle of and that will continue today is what's called the 5 obstacles and the 8 antidotes, the 5 obstacles to attaining calm abiding, and how do we antidote those. And we recall from last week that there were 4 antidotes to laziness. Laziness we've talked about extensively before. It's that inability to get on our cushion for a variety of reasons, so we need to do the work of meditation. We need some faith in our ability to achieve that and the great benefits of doing so. We We need an aspiration to actually move in that direction, and then we need to put the effort into it. Nothing is accomplished without effort. And then eventually we attain some more serviceability of the mind in particular, but also the body. And this gets fully developed, this state of pliancy, when we actually attain calm abiding. But nonetheless, these are the major antidotes that keep us from having to succumb to laziness and not do our meditation practice. So again, these are things to be aware of and to really generate consciously our faith in the ability to attain calm abiding and the teachings that point to the benefits of it and so on, and then aspiring to do it, putting the effort into it. And we're never going to get anywhere if we don't get on the cushion and do that work. Then we looked at this idea of there's these two factors, mindfulness and introspection. Mindfulness is the first antidote that we use, and that's towards or against the forgetting the instruction. Forgetting the instruction means forgetting the object. So if we are told by our guru or we decide for ourselves to meditate on the breath, well, then whenever we lose the breath, we are forgetting the instruction. Well, how do we keep from doing that? By maintaining mindfulness of the breath. And mindfulness here again is a non-forgetfulness. It's a state where we are still adhering to and staying present with whatever object we are choosing to meditate on. So again, that is one factor that is needed for developing our deeper concentration and our calm abiding. The other is a factor called introspection. Introspection helps us to kind of stay sort of clued into what's going on in our own minds so that we can see whether these forces are arising. Again, we have these two things we call laxity and excitement that are the more traditional ways that we talk about the deeper development of our calm abiding. But when we start our meditation, we have things that are akin to this, that are in the same sort of territory as each of these. Laxity has that quality of dullness to it, but it is a more refined version of that that we won't probably notice until we're doing meditation for a longer period of time. But we have dullness, sleepiness, fogginess, heaviness. These are the sorts of qualities, again, that we need to combat in our meditation, that when the mind begins to draw in on an object, mental object, what have you, then we generally have this force occurring that takes us deeper inside and makes our minds very unclear. Then we have the factor of excitement. Excitement kind of is in the nature of all these distractions, these mental wandering, the tendency for the mind to move out to objects that seem more exciting than what we are meditating on. Excitement itself has a flavor of attachment. So let's review these really quickly. Again, laxity and excitement block these two main qualities. Mental clarity, as I said, is hindered by laxity and other coarser forms of dullness, whereas mental stability, staying steady and present with the object, is impeded by excitement and other forms of distraction or wandering. So again, we see where we are in our own development of our meditation in terms of which of these is more prevalent. And maybe you have some days when one is more prevalent than the other, but we need to be aware of these. This third fault is not identifying when these arise. So we need this factor of introspection to identify it. So in the traditional texts, they do talk about the refined versions, the deeper versions of each of these, the gross level as well as the subtle level. Excitement, again, being a mind that is very much attached to pleasurable things that we would rather be experiencing at that time. This grosser level of excitement is where your mind completely loses its object of concentration. Fairly easy to identify. I'm setting these this slide and the next three slides out in terms of probably how easy they are to identify. First, it's very easy to identify gross excitement. We sit down to meditate and we start thinking about things from the past or things we'd rather do in the moment or future plans, what have you. And we just aren't on the object at all. Whereas subtle excitement is where you retain your focus on the object clearly, but a subtle part of the mind, kind of below the level of conceptual thought, moves towards an attractive object. It's illustrated by water moving beneath a layer of ice. So it's that subtle movement of the mind that while you are seeming like you're holding on to the object clearly, you have some subtle part of the mind that is moving in that direction of attachment. Gross laxity, again, we don't become aware of this form of dullness to the mind until we've been meditating for some time. I think they say it's at the third stage where you begin to become aware of what is gross laxity, what is subtle laxity, what have you. But gross laxity is where you remain mindful of your meditation object and you have its image very stable, but it's not clear. I mean, it's by clear we mean that there isn't a sharp focus to the mind. Gross laxity is therefore quite different to sleepiness, whereby the object of concentration is totally lost in the fog of unconsciousness. Again, this might be what's happening initially in this first few stages of our meditation as we sit down to meditate, and maybe we just, because of that drawing the mind in, we just go into a place of almost going to sleep, that heaviness of mind that is a part of our factor of sleep. Subtle laxity isn't real, again, clued in until a little bit later. It's very hard to discern. But you're mindful of your object that you're meditating on. You have stability and clarity, but the factor of clarity is not intense. What this means is that there isn't this increased sort of vibrancy to the mind. The energy is sort of lost. Although your concentration is strong, your mind adheres to the object and the object is clear. It is as though the fine focus has failed. This is again due to a decline in the energy in the mind. So this is where I'm starting the new slides in terms of material that I haven't presented before. One more bit on this, because again, this is showing how if we do have this fault of mental sinking, this laxity, it can become problematic. It says here, Geshe Sopa says, it can creep up on you in a sneaky way without you realizing it. Laxity is there, though you think that you are in deep concentration. And again, we might be beginning to get a flavor for this, some of you, in your own meditation. It's not to say that you have to go really far along the path to developing calm abiding before you notice it. You might be able to hold on to the object for some time, but you start losing that focus on the object. It starts becoming diminished in its energy. So he says your focus is still on the object, but it has become weak, and the clarity of your visualization has dimmed. Such a fault will delay the attainment of perfect concentration or calm abiding for a long time. So again, this is the fault that we have to be aware of, is if we're not identifying it right away and rectifying things, then we're going to have problems. It's going to creep into our meditation and we'll keep meditating, kind of similar to, how I was saying that if we sit down for shorter increments of time, we'll have better focus. It's a similar thing, where if we do start extending that time, but we think that we're in focus and we're not, we have laxity present, then we're going to have meditation periods that aren't so productive. And you're going to become acclimated to that, thinking that that's your concentration, when it actually is a form of laxity that is present there. You think, oh, I'm on the object, but you haven't made it, again, very clear, nor have you made it intense, sort of vibrant. Again, I'm not just talking about the visual appearance of something. I'm talking about the nature of the mind here. The mind has that clarity. That mind has that, kind of vibrancy that makes it intense, that makes your whole meditation experience very different. So again, meditation, as I've mentioned earlier, we need a quality of relaxation to do it. It's not to say that relaxation isn't a part of it, but it's not the goal. The goal isn't to just kind of mellow out in your meditation and kind of get this dull state of mind that's on like some sort of, level plane. Rather, we want a very sharp mind, because once more, this is the way in which we are going to be able to use our concentration in order to discern the nature of reality and the sixth perfection, in order to even gain realizations of all the other topics of the Lam Rim. How we're actually going to change our minds is when we have that factor to our concentration, as opposed to, again, having the kind of dullness, the things that get in the way and what have you. These are going to be problematic if we don't address them. All right. So then he goes on to say, of course, it's not enough to simply know the characteristics of these, laxity, excitement, all the other mental factors, mindfulness, introspection. You must develop an actual introspection, the primary antidote to laxity and excitement, so that you recognize the presence of these two obstacles. Let's talk a bit more about what we mean by introspection. He says, as your skill in the technique of introspection increases, you will get better at identifying the obstacles as soon as they arise. And eventually you'll be able to identify them when they are on the verge of arising. When we begin to see the hint of them arising, we'll actually have that ability to discern that that's going on and very quickly address them. So introspection or vigilance is the main method for cultivating shamatha. Again, we talked about mindfulness being an important factor, but introspection, plays a very key role in this process of analyzing and refining our awareness. It's kind of, again, the if you were comparing it to the string of the instrument, that it is too loose so it won't play and is too tight so that it'll break. It's the ear that is listening very clearly to what's going on so that we know exactly what needs to happen and how we need to tighten or loosen the string. It has two aspects. It introspectively examines the mind again and again, so it has that kind of continual checking in to see to examine it, the nature of our minds. And secondly, it's actually vigilantly checking to see whether the mind is still placed on the chosen object of meditation. And of course, if it's not on the object of meditation, it checks to see what is going on, so that we identify what is happening, and we, tighten it if it is too loose, we loosen it if it is too tight. So there is that quality to our introspection as well, kind of knowing what is happening with regard to the quality of the mind at that time. And this is a common way of talking about this mind of introspection, referring to it as kind of a spy who's watching the mind, sort of in a corner of the mind, to see if it's still focused on its object. Sometimes I use the analogy of a security guard. And the security guard, of course, if you have a security guard who's around like an entire, college campus, for example, the security guard can't stay at one building all the time, right? He or she has to go wandering around the grounds and eventually come back and check that one place. Well, it's a bit similar too. I mean, the introspection shouldn't be there all the time. If it is continuously there, then we're not going to be able to develop any mindfulness, any continuity to our awareness of the object. But if we check in occasionally, just like that security guard who's just checking to make sure, is that this building okay? Is everything fine? Are we doing all right? Well, then, if we don't have that checking in at all, then we have no awareness as to what's really going on in the mind. So we have to, once more, we talked a little bit last week, there was a question about if we have introspection coming in too much. Well, then we simply need to lessen that. We need to have some awareness to say, no, it's okay. I can abide with the object, stay present, and not let the introspection become an obstacle itself. But we need it. We absolutely need it to come in occasionally. Again, the duration of that, or I mean, the frequency of that, is up to each of us individually. When you're beginning your meditation, you probably do need your introspection to be coming in very frequently. But once you've been meditating for a while, introspection may not be needed quite so often. And of course, as he says there, if the mind is not on its object, you must bring the mind back. And then, just as a spy uses various instruments like cameras and hidden microphones to track what his target is up to, you use vigilant introspection to keep tabs on your mind. Eventually, after enough training, the mind remains on its object without effort. It is a spiritual strength of mind. So, one thing I might point out here is that when we go through these qualities of mindfulness and introspection, don't think that these are only relevant in our meditation. They are actually highlighted by Master Shantideva in the 5th chapter of his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life as being tools we need throughout our day to be vigilant in terms of what's going on with our mind, with our speech, with our actions. This factor of introspection isn't just something we're doing in meditation. It's something that we should carry with us, so that we do have some awareness of where we are. What are we saying? What are we thinking? Of course, we start working with the coarser elements first. That's the whole path to enlightenment, right? First, pay attention to your speech and what you're doing with your body. As Venerable Robina says, zip your lip and keep your hands to yourself. We have to kind of be very aware of how we are interacting with others through those physical and verbal environments that we're in. But then we have to begin to start looking at the mind. And of course, our meditation helps us with that. But when we're off our cushion, we have to have that same introspection. We have to check up and see, what are my thoughts as I'm watching the TV and, a politician is speaking? What are my thoughts as I'm on the phone with a loved one talking about whatever? What are the thoughts I'm generating in the midst of all of this? Because that's where the real work is. Changing the external stuff is relatively easy. I mean, it's difficult, right? To not engage in so much um, idle talk, meaningless talk and what have you, these sorts of things that we have very habitually. Shutting all of those off is easier, though, than shutting off the mind, be having antidotes to all these things that are going on. But we're never going to develop any antidotes unless we're aware of these minds arising. That's what the force of introspection is. So just know that I'm just highlighting that because we're talking about them in the context of developing concentration, but know that these two factors are very important. It's important that we remain mindful of what we are doing, what we're focused on, how we are in the world, and then we have an introspection that checks up to see if we're staying true to that. That's like our our way of keeping the compass in place. Our mindfulness is sort of that placement in that right direction, but sometimes we go astray and we need that force to correct it. So let's look at how we actually go about correcting things eventually. That's where we get into the fault of non-application. So in the fourth or the third fault, we weren't identifying when laxity and excitement arises. So if we develop our force of introspection and we identify it's arising, sometimes again the simple antidote is just to change the quality of the mind, to tighten or loosen the mind. But if we don't apply an appropriate antidote, if we don't actually do something to counteract that laxity or excitement or dullness or distraction, well, then we're going to have problems. Our meditation is not going to be so good. And as I said, we might end up continuing to have that as the entirety of our meditation, that quality of the mind being lax or excited. And we'll think we're doing a really good job of meditating, but we're not. So, in the case of non application of an antidote, we have to apply an antidote. Application is the antidote to that. So let's take a look at this. When awareness identifies laxity or excitement, and by awareness he means, this is Geshe Loden, so he means introspection. So when your introspection identifies laxity or excitement, you should be quick to oppose them. The first line of attack when laxity is noticed is, rather than interrupting your concentration, to apply specific opponents to laxity, to simply tighten your concentration. This is the simplest and most specific one to laxity, is because the mind has gotten lax, dull, is no longer clear or as intense, then you tighten your concentration. Again, it's like the string of the instrument that when it begins to get a little too loose, we have to tighten it so it will play correctly, so that it will have the right note and so on. If you tighten too much, however, it will lead to excitement, at which time you will have to loosen your hold on the object. If you loosen too much, then laxity will enter again. You therefore must balance tightening and loosening your concentration while maintaining the object strongly. So this is what I pointed out in our meditation this morning when we began, is just to become aware of that factor that has to be there. When you see that things are getting too loose, then you have to tighten. When you see that things are getting too excited and kind of that sort of quality to the mind, then you have to bring the mind down. You have to loosen a bit. And this is the whole practice of our developing concentration in essence, is doing this balancing act between these two, assessing how tight or loose the mind is and then correcting when needed. And that's going to be, again, the whole several stages all the way to calm abiding are about that whole process, until we get to a place where those distractions no longer arise, which I think I'll be presenting it shortly, but it occurs on the eighth ground, or the eighth level. Eighth stage is where we have this sort of equipoise where no distractions are arising anymore, because we've done a really good job of combating them. But until we get there, we have to combat these. We have to identify through our introspection what is going on. And then the very simplest antidote is simply tighten or loosen the mind, depending upon what you assess is going on, what is happening. We do have need sometimes grosser or more direct opponents that we'll need to apply. Because as he says here, in the process, if the process of tightening and loosening is not enough to remove your laxity or excitement, you will need to spend more time on the specific antidotes to them before coming back to the object of concentration. So if you can't stay present with the object you're meditating on, the breath or the image of a Buddha, whatever it is, and do this tightening and loosening exercise, if you're simply, the mind is too excited or too lax, then you have to do some more specific things. And that means moving away from the object you're meditating on and focusing on removing those obstacles. So let's look at the ones opposing laxity. This is the first in terms of the how to correct laxity. The fault of laxity is that the mind becomes too withdrawn. To overcome this, you should extend the object, expand it, increase its brilliance, and focus on its details. If this is not successful, then you must move on to the next stage. So this one, you do stay with the object to some degree, but you're focusing on a different appearance of the object, if you will. They say that again, the withdrawing of the mind, and let's for this use the example of you're meditating on an image of a Buddha. Well, if you're withdrawing the mind to a small object, well, then the laxity could creep in there. You want to expand the object, make it a bit bigger, in your visual awareness within your own mind, your mind's eye. Increase its brilliance. Sometimes this is really good with visualized objects, is to make them much brighter than they are. So in the case of the image of the Buddha, we see the Buddha as having a golden color. We'll make it very like light radiating gold from the Buddha, and focus on the details, kind of increase that ability to refine your image so that you bring the mind up. And if that's not successful, of course, if we're working with the breath, it's kind of hard to say, well, how do you expand the breath or extend the breath? But there is a way of focusing on the breath to where you become more aware of kind of the qualities of the breath, to kind of increase your attention to the breath, if you will. So it's not to say that you can't do the same sort of thing with the breath, but it might be a little bit harder compared to a visualized object. The second antidote, if that doesn't work, is with laxity, your mind sinks, becoming heavy and depressed. You therefore require methods to lift the mind, to make it light and joyful. So here we're going to actually leave our meditation object and focus on things that bring the mind up. Well, what brings the mind up within the Lam Rim? He says you should therefore release your object of concentration and reflect on Guru Yoga, our incredible, precious, kind gurus who can be so inspiring for us. The great value of your birth, of leisure and fortune. This is what's often called our perfect human rebirth, thinking how amazing it is that we have this quality of this human life and are able to, enjoy the good fortune that this life has, the opportunity it affords, the qualities of the Buddhas, rejoice in our own and others' good virtues, good actions, generosity, and so on. I mean, we have a lot of things that we can turn the mind towards that are very uplifting. Some of the topics of the Lam Rim are the opposite. We're going to see them as antidotes to opposing excitement. But many of the topics of the Lam Rim really bring our spirit up. We might reflect on the good qualities of our guru, for example, and the kindness of our guru. And that may be enough to get us out of that funk, and we can go back to the meditation object and be very clear and focused on it. These subjects will lift the mind by making it happy. When your mind feels bright and awake again, resume single-pointed concentration on your chosen object. So this makes some sense, right? To bring the mind up through those types of meditations. What is a third opponent to laxity? He says here, as you recite the wrathful mantra, pay, the H after the P doesn't make it an F sound. It makes it an aspiration with the P. So it's a pay. And that A has got that kind of sound, pay. And the T isn't pronounced. Pay is a very wrathful syllable mantra. Sometimes at the end of wrathful, longer wrathful mantras, mantras associated with wrathful Buddhas. By wrath, we mean that force that kind of cuts through the nonsense, that compassionate force that recognizes that, something forceful needs to be done. So that's why this syllable is used, is because this lax mind needs something very sharp to cut through it, something very wrathful to force it out of that. So as you recite this, this mantra, pay, the light shoots up from your heart through the crown of your head and illuminates the reaches of space. It seems like I skipped oh, I did skip I thought there was somehow a slide missing, because the point is, if you're not able to overcome laxity, a yet stronger method is to visualize your mind as a bright drop of white light at your heart chakra. So when you have this drop of white light at your heart chakra, then when you recite pay, this light that's at your heart shoots up from your heart through the crown of your head and illuminates the reaches of space. Again, it's an expansion that's going on here. So once more, just to review, you have this, think your mind is this bright drop of white light that's here at the heart chakra. The heart chakra is at the level of the heart in the center of the chest. And you say the word pay very forcefully, and the light shoots up from your heart through the crown of your head. And think that that light of your mind illuminates the reaches of space. and it kind of brings the mind into a very vast quality rather than the sort of downward condensing of the mind that happens when it's lax, when it's still. Sorry, I skipped that slide. I knew there was something wrong with that, but I didn't notice that I'd skipped a slide. All right. The fourth antidote to opposing laxity: if you are still unsuccessful, then it is time to take a break from your meditation session. Because if you're sitting there, you're trying to adjust it, you're trying to, heighten the mind through these other, meditations. You're even doing the pay visualization with the drop of light, and it's not working. Well, then get up and walk around outside, he says. Gaze far into the distance, splash water on your face, or do other things to invigorate you. When rested and invigorated, then return to your meditation. Other things that are mentioned often is that, when we sit in meditation posture, again, we should have an upright quality to the body, but sometimes the body begins to sink with our meditation. Check that too, to make sure that your body is still upright, that the spine is more perfectly aligned. And then also, we often talk about the head being just tilted slightly forward. You might tilt it back up a little bit. That might help as well to kind of increase your, bring the mind up by bringing your head up. Also, we talk about the eyes, right? About keeping the eyelids just very slightly open, just a little crack of light coming in. Well, you might expand that a bit, bringing in a bit more light, because that drawing the eyelids downward may be also a factor contributing to your laxity or to the dullness in the mind. Increasing the light in the room. A lot of people like to meditate in the dark. I know Venerable Rabina, once she came down when we were doing our meditation retreat at the IHM, and she was like, "Why is it so dark in here? People need to turn the light up. You're going to meditate, you turn the light up." And so there is that quality that, you want to bring the light up too, to keep the mind alert and awake. So don't think that you have to meditate in a room with just like very low lighting, like, it's a candlelight dinner or something. Um, Another thing is of course in the winter time it might be a lot to have your window open to bring in the cold air. But if you have it open a crack, that cold air sometimes keeps the mind more awake because of the influence on the body. Again, we're not meditating with the body, but our bodies have a great impact on our minds. So know that that fresh air sometimes helps, because the dimming of the mind often is reduced by breathing in fresh cold air. Of course, in the summer, you wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want to bring in all of that hot, stifling air that we sometimes have in our summer months. So anyway, those are some of the other things that are mentioned. But just keep those in mind and see what works for you. Some people find that, doing some exercise during like getting up off the meditation cushion and doing something to get the body going a bit more. Maybe we aren't getting enough sleep, and so we need to wake our bodies up a bit more as well as our minds. So all right, so let's go on then to how do we oppose excitement. Opposing excitement. When you become aware of excitement, try loosening your concentration. Of course, that was mentioned earlier, right? That idea of loosening, but trying too hard or being too tight causes excitement. If loosening is not effective, then use methods that will cause the mind to become more sober. So again, this is the main advice, is always to try to loosen the mind when we see that excitement, to let go of whatever it was the mind was being excited by and bring the mind back to the object that we're focusing on. The second technique then, of course, is to bring your mind down to earth by contemplating things like karma and impermanence, these factors that are the cause of our being in an unsatisfactory state to a large degree. Our karma that dictates all of our experiences within samsara, the impermanence of everything, which of course is a reality that has no real quality to it, but it's something we often are blind to, especially the impermanence that manifests in terms of death. The suffering of death, our need to work with our minds to be in better shape when we finally do have our moment of death, the suffering of the lower realms that might ensue if we haven't really tended to our minds and engaged in virtue, and so on. The general sufferings of psychic existence, these are not pretty topics to contemplate, but they are parts of the path. And if we are seeing that the mind is too elevated, too excited, these will sober us up, right? Think about your own impending death. Think about what will ensue then, what will come after death, the general sufferings that we all have to endure within samsara. These are very sobering topics. Reflect on the suffering of those in the world who are starving or at war. These subjects will have a sobering effect, and when the mind is more stable, you can return to the meditation object. So again, it doesn't mean that you go off to that subject and you just stay there. You use that as a tool to sober up the mind, to bring the mind down, and then you go back to your object of observation. If the above is not successful, whoops, a third technique, a more forceful method, is to practice counting the breath. The technique of counting the breath brings the mind into greater focus and allows you to let go of those distractions. In some ways, it is because it gives your conceptual mind a little bit more to do. You know, we like being entertained with our conceptual mind. That's what excitement's all about, right? We like thinking about all these other pleasant things that we would rather be experiencing or that we experienced in the past or want to experience in the future. So this gives you a technique of working with your conceptual mind by counting the breath. Now he says count from 1 to 21, and if you lose concentration, begin again at 1. But I think it's important that you work with whatever works for you. I think some people find counting to 21. I mean, it's a good number to aim for, because if you can actually be present with the breath, counting every inhalation and exhalation as 1, inhalation, exhalation 2, and be with it for 21 breaths, that's a fair amount of time. And you will actually see that the mind does calm down quite a bit, that excitement diminishes, because you're using your conceptual mind as a tool to help you by counting, keeping track of the breath, as a way of bringing the mind to that greater focus. But start with maybe counting to 10 or counting to 5 even. Some people say go to 10 and then go backwards from 10 to 1. Well, that keeps you kind of on your toes, right? But if you do lose track at any time in the counting, you should go back and start over. Don't go, oh, I think I was at 7, and then you just go forward as if you were at 7. No, you've lost track. So you need to go back and work with trying to develop the continuity of the awareness with the object by counting the breath. Of course, again, if the breath is your object, well, then you're still going to be going back to the breath. But if you were using another object, you go to the counting the breath, and then you go back to the object when you feel confident that you won't have that mental wandering, that excitement, taking you off the object. So that's the idea behind this one. He says it's a more forceful technique, but it's just a little more kind of does allow the mind to have a tool that it can use of counting the breath to begin that process of regaining focus. If you manage 21 without a break in concentration, extend your target to 100. I found this pretty outrageous. I can't imagine counting 100 breaths. I'm not there. I'm sorry. I would lose track well before that. Um, but keep counting until the mind becomes stable. Maybe the idea is again, if you manage 21 without break, maybe do 21 again. And then if you get to a place where you do feel like you've developed, again, a diminishment of that tendency for the mind to get excited, to wander away, then go back to your meditation object. And if it's the breath, then you can let go of the counting and just focus on the breath. Many people do find counting the breath a helpful technique. I just once more encourage people not to make that the sole part of your meditation, that all you're doing is counting the breath, because once more, it's too conceptual. It's using the mind in that conceptual way. Fourth, if this is not successful, whoops, I don't know why it's doing that. If this is not successful, take a break and tire yourself a little with physical activity. Relax for a while and then resume the session. So again, he uses the idea of doing physical activity here to kind of wear yourself out. But I think sometimes physical activity wakes you up too. I mean, I find in the winter going out for a walk, I mean, I come back and I feel pretty alert, whereas some people, if you do a lot of, exercise, I guess, yes, you could feel a lot more withdrawn, and the excitement and that energy will be diminished to a greater level. But the other things that are talked about in terms of, the external factors that might have a role on this, again, if you um, if you want to, you can close the eyes more. You can again withdraw things a little bit more physically. Maybe even put on a meditation shawl or something that kind of contains the body a bit more, because again, the physical effects we have on the body do have an impact on the mind. Could take the light down a little bit, the eyes a little bit more closed, though, that sort of thing. But again, know that these are all things that you can experiment with and see what happens. But that's your last resort. When we the basic instruction once more is to do that loosening or tightening, so that we can begin to learn how to work with just increasing, kind of using the dial of our minds to find that exact place where we're perfectly in tune with what we need to be doing. But know that at the beginning, in these first, years of meditation, perhaps months of meditation, you definitely need to use coarser, more forceful ways of correcting things. So know that, again, it's just up to you and your own practice to sort of monitor all of that. Of course, if you get to a place where you're really stuck in your meditation and you can't correct either of those, and you're even doing all of these things, well, you might consult with a teacher, somebody who you feel confident is a good meditation instructor, who's got some practice and some experience around this. Geshe Sherab, I would say, is probably pretty accomplished and would be a useful person to consult with on your meditation, to see how to correct things at that time. This is why, again, when we talk about being in retreat, it's useful if you can be in retreat with somebody who is an experienced meditation practitioner you can go to and say, this is what's going on for me, as you get into the finer recesses of your mind and seeing what's all happening, so they can give you more specific antidotes that might work for you. Let's go ahead and finish off. Oh, but this is actually, I think, a good place to stop then. Yeah, because we're at just a few minutes before 11. So let's go ahead and take a break, take about a 10-minute stretch or so. So we'll resume at around, just turn to 58. So let's say let's go with 10 after. I think that's fine. Give you a few more minutes just to get up, relax, go get some cold air, whatever you need to kind of wake up. So, all right. So we'll take about, again, break till 10 after the hour. See you soon. Start with shorter increments of time that we're doing a meditation on the breath, for example, or whatever object we're using. And in that space of time, we can kind of heighten that awareness that is watching what is going on, and bring it into our sphere of experience as often as we need to within that shorter period of time. And then we begin to gain kind of I don't know, it becomes a habit, a pattern, and that we would then see that being more natural in terms of it arising whenever we're doing our meditation. Um, it's hard for me to say exactly because, again, I think we all have different levels of these to some degree. Again, we would have to have some measure of introspection. If you compare it to like when we're out driving on the road, we have kind of the mind that is staying mindful of the where the car is in the lane, and then we have an occasional checking in to see if we've gone a little bit to the left or the right that would potentially cause us to have an accident. And so we know we have that factor of introspection even in our daily life that we use to some degree. We're just not using it as a focus within to look at our mind. We're using it perhaps again as a way of discerning what's going on in our external world and how we're behaving. But with the mind, it becomes an important tool that we just have to, again, begin using, but not overusing. But again, not underusing either. Trying to find the right balance with regard to that, depending once more on where we're at in our own development of mindful awareness of the object. If we need that introspection checking in frequently, then we simply have to bring it to mind, bring it to bear. I'm going to check because I've never really seen any real specific advice about developing it. Certainly, the introspection we have with regard to watching our minds off the cushion comes from the time we spend on the cushion. So we develop that skill definitely within our meditation much more easily than we do outside of meditation. But I've never seen any specific things. I'm going to check before next week's class in a few books and see if I can find some information on that. One in particular is a book that Alan Wallace wrote, not the one that we've been working with, but another one that I think might give some clue into that. But so I'm sorry I can't really give you much more than simply the idea of, once more, shorter periods of time, becoming more aware of how introspection is playing a role. And then once we gain an appreciation for it, it's up to us to use it. It's up to us to kind of bring that to bear and to make sure that we have that quality to our meditation. Otherwise, again, we can spend huge amounts of time not even being on the object, being in la la land, or wherever, and we don't even notice it because we don't have that factor checking in. So I'm sorry I can't give anyone more specific or give you more specific information on that. Another thing that was mentioned by a student was that, this idea that when we do wander away from the object or see that we've lost the object, to not have this punishing mind, this mind that beats ourselves up for not having done it correctly, but rather even to rejoice that we noticed it. I always tell people this in terms of whenever you notice a delusion arising in your mind, even if it's after you've already screamed at somebody for 10 minutes and then you go, oh my gosh, there's anger. Well, then that's great that you've recognized it then, rather than, not recognize it at all, just gone about as if it's completely normal and nothing you even need to address. So I think this is true with our meditation too. We have to be really kind to ourselves and rejoice whenever we notice things are going astray, and not beat ourselves up for that. I was reminded when I saw that comment of a comment that Jack Kornfield made once, and he said, it's just you sitting on your meditation cushion in your own mind. If you lose the object or something goes astray, you wander away for a while. It's no big deal because it's just you. You're the only one who witnessed it. Nobody else is going to say anything. And he compared it to the French chef, Julia Childs, being in her kitchen all by herself. And she said one time, she said, "Oh, if you drop the lamb, well, you just pick it up. If nobody's around, you just pick it up. It goes on the floor, you just pick it up. So it's a similar thing. I don't know if that's quite the right analogy, but when you're in meditation, nobody's witnessing it, nobody's observing it. You don't have to report to anybody how you did and everything. You just let it go, and you be glad that you noticed that something happened, and go back to your meditation. No big deal. And then there was a question about the 9-round breathing meditation. And I've never heard this idea that was being proposed of like doing more than 3 meditations on each, so that if you do 3 in through the right and out through the left, then maybe doing 6 in through the right and out through the left, and maybe 6 in through the left and out through the right. It's always presented as a 9-round breathing meditation. And I don't know if there's a specific purpose behind that. I've never really been asked that question. I don't think there's any fault if you do like 20 in through the right and out through the left, and then 20 in through the left and out through the right, and then 20 through both, and out through the central channel. I don't think there's any great fault, but I think it works nicely just to use it as a 9-round breathing meditation, and then you know repeat it if you need to, and then you do find, I find when I repeat it often, that I feel even more clarity, that the first time kind of begins the process, and the second time maybe helps it settle a bit more, and by the third time, if you do it a third time, it really is quite useful, I think. So that's my suggestion on that. But again, I don't think there's any fault. I think you can definitely do it that way. If you're curious about what I'm talking about, if you don't know the 9-round breathing meditation, know that that too is posted out on the materials link at the Dropbox that you can go to and download that. And it's a very wonderful little meditation to do at the beginning of your practice to kind of focus the mind a bit. All right, so let's go back to the slides, and we're on to the 5th problem, the 5th obstacle. Again, the 4th one was where we aren't applying non-application of an antidote or a opposing force, and we looked at how we actually apply some opposing force, how we actually do something that will rectify the mind when we have laxity or excitement present, or again, dullness or distraction, because we're going to be mostly in the beginning working with coarser forms of all of this, not necessarily the subtler forms. So the antidote to what's called over-application, by over-application, we mean that eventually in our practice, we get to a place, and this really doesn't become more prevalent until further down the road, when we are way up there in the higher stages of our practice, where, and they say, especially on that 8th level, when you no longer have these arising, you no longer have any laxity or excitement arising, but you keep applying antidotes because you're used to having something there that you need to combat. And so that's over application. That's going to become an obstacle, because at that point, the mind simply needs to rest. It needs to rest in this state that we call equanimity. Now, before I go into the explanation of this in more detail, let me talk about this word equanimity, because most of you are going, well, equanimity. I mean, I hear this in a different context in Buddhism. There are actually 3 ways that we use the word equanimity. One is this context we're going to talk about here, which means a balanced state of the mind, where the mind isn't doing anything, it's just continuing to go forward. That means the mind resting in that equanimous state. It's not needing to do any adjustment because it's just going to hang out there. We will get to a place in our meditation where that is the way we need to continue, is to not keep applying all these antidotes, because the mind's doing just fine. It's kind of like, again, I use the idea of introspection sometimes being similar to a parent that's watching over their child. You don't want them hovering, always watching the child, because then the child feels so self-conscious and doesn't, do what they're supposed to do. They get really, I don't know, frustrated. And then you don't want a parent that never checks in on the child, because then the child can be doing whatever. They can be doodling and, never doing their homework or what have you. But at some point, when the child learns that diligence and that discipline and starts engaging in their homework pretty, respectfully and mindfully, well, then the parent doesn't need to be there. And the parent's going to be an obstacle at that point. So this is kind of the analogy we're using here, is that you don't need to have this mind of introspection. You don't need to have any corrections that are being made. You don't need to have any of that stuff going on because of this equanimous mind, or because of this concentration you've developed. And instead you have to have this equanimous mind, this just hanging out with it. That's the first way that we're going to look at equanimity, and the only way we're going to look at it in relation to calm abiding. A second way that you might hear the term equanimity in Buddhism is in terms of the four immeasurables and the thought of equanimity that we develop as a part of our developing a bodhicitta. And that's the idea of beings being equanimous in terms of their attitudes towards others. We have differing attitudes towards people who are close to us, who are opposed to us, who are not known to us, what we call our friends, enemies, and strangers. And so essentially, we want to have a more equanimous mind there, to not have attachment for our friends and anger towards our enemies and an indifference towards all those strangers. So that's a second use of equanimity in Buddhism. A third use is where we refer to a feeling tone. Many of you know the mental factor of feeling. It's one of the five aggregates. It's essentially referring to a feeling tone that we have at any particular time. Usually we are having, well, I would say usually, actually, we're probably having a feeling more or less of an equanimity, a neutrality. But oftentimes we have a pleasurable feeling. Something pleasurable comes into our sphere of experience, and we have that pleasurable feeling elevating us. And then sometimes we have a painful feeling, right? And so pleasure and pain are the two main ones that we go back and forth between, that we crave after the pleasure, are so attached to it, and then we have a strong aversion towards the pain. Well, the equanimous feeling, the feeling of equanimity, that's kind of a neutral tone, we don't really have much reaction to that other than just kind of getting dulled out. It doesn't really increase any of our uh, awareness of anything, and it just becomes maybe a bit of an obstacle itself. But here again, in the context of meditation, we're mostly talking about this antidote of equanimity, which is keeping the mind from doing anything else. You just keep with that balanced mind observing the object. And again, the feeling of equanimity is another topic. The idea of the immeasurable equanimity and so on is another topic, but just know that that's different ways that we use equanimity. Here we're talking about it being this antidote to the tendency that we have to correct things, to over apply ways of counteracting these obstacles. So Geshe Loden, in describing this, he says, equanimity is the antidote to this. This is a virtual mental factor that causes the mind to dwell naturally on the object of concentration without exertion. It's just a kind of hanging out with that and allowing the mind to do what it's doing, which is being present in a very sharp, intense, way with the object. The attainment of calm abiding depends. Okay, now we're moving into another topic. Let me stop here and make sure that there are no questions with this. The 5 obstacles and the 8 antidotes. Any questions on that? I don't see any hands up. Oh, Nancy, there, I see. Sorry.
Genla, what about if you can't sit? Is it okay to do walking meditation? Or if you have an injury, how does that fit into not being able to just sit for a long period?
I think walking meditation is a useful tool to complement sitting meditation. I don't think it's meant to be our primary practice, because of course it is a little too discursive. It's, the mind can wander a lot more when we are out, walking. And walking meditation, it's not that it's done like at a vibrant pace or anything. It's done really quite mindfully. If you haven't done it before, it is really a useful tool. When I've done calm abiding, well, more or less like kind of a vipassana type of retreat, they usually alternate between sitting and walking meditation. And that's because it kind of gives you a bit more movement that helps with the body and the winds and what have you. And I think it's a wonderful complement to sitting meditation. If you are injured or have something going on with you, back that's bad or what have you, and it's very hard to sit, I think I mentioned when we talked about the posture that it is okay to meditate lying down. I guess the biggest obstacle we have when we lie down is that that's what we do when we go to bed. So if you don't have a sort of really sharp, alert mind, there'll be that tendency for the mind to get somewhat foggy when we lay down. If you can adjust your sitting to a place where you can be comfortable, such as sitting in a chair where there's a good back support or something that will help you to be able to maintain an uprightness to the body, that probably would be preferable to laying down. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I would say that walking meditation alone is the best practice. Walking meditation is a useful way to complement our sitting meditation, especially in retreat. But it's trying to bring that same quality of mindfulness that we have with regard to the object we're meditating on to our walking meditation. The instructions I've received in doing walking meditation is where you're trying to be extremely present with everything in terms of the way that the foot is rising when you're lifting up the one foot and the other foot down, and then the way it is going down when you place it, and then the way the other one is lifting, and then, and so on. So it's a very mindful practice. It's not just going out for a walk. But nonetheless, I think it would be very hard, in my estimation, for that to be the entirety of your practice, because I think that wouldn't allow the mind to be as focused as some stationary practice. And that's just my own assessment. I don't know. I've never heard that as a gospel truth from any guru. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we don't do walking meditation quite as much as they do in the Vipassana tradition. But maybe someone else has heard something about that could give some additional, I don't know, information on this. Anyone? Did that help, Nancy, or not? Did I answer your question?
Yes, and I think the alternating is good,
Yeah.
if you can't sit or lie down. But yeah, I
Yeah.
just wondered. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's best. It is best if you can find a way to, adjust whatever you're doing to be able to be stationary. Again, if you do have an injury or something that is keeping you, if you do have to, if you're in the hospital and you're, the entire time you're prone more or less and you're not really able to get up and walk around or sit up, well then, you might have to just adjust your meditation to that situation. But hopefully over time, people will find a way to make it work for them. It's, hopefully just something that needs to be dealt with temporarily. And then, as you said, when you are in deeper meditation retreat and what have you, it does help to go out and do walking meditation, because it's a really wonderful platform to support what we're trying to do on the cushion as well. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Nancy, for that. Thank you all for the questions in the chat box as well. All right, let's go on then. Let's go back to the slides. And what we're going to do now, and actually maybe I'll first show, well, let's go back to the slides. I think that's probably a good place to start. And then I'm going to toggle back and forth because I've got some additional things that I want to share. This is what's called the 9 mental stages. I've alluded to these a little bit earlier in terms of the way that one progresses in developing their mind all the way to calm abiding. Calm abiding is the 10th thing that one achieves after going through the 9 mental stages. The attainment, and these 9 mental stages and the additional factors I'm going to talk about today are on the handout that is at the website, again on the Dropbox page. The attainment of calm abiding depends on the progressive development of your concentration through 9 stages, often called the 9 mental abidings. Ideally, progress will be made in a special calm abiding retreat with the conducive circumstances described earlier. So again, this is what Geshe Loden even says. So I've cited a number of sources that all seem to say that in order for us to, ideally get to that place of developing calm abiding, we need a special environment in which to do that. It's not to say that it's impossible in your home, in your daily life to do that. It's just extremely difficult, I think. So then we go on, and he says, however, it is also possible to make progress in the development of calm abiding around your normal daily schedule by meditating regularly in the morning and evening. And of course, we saw one comment earlier, I think it was Alan Wallace, who said, 1 or 2 hours, a day. So it's a fair amount of time you'd have to spend of your day doing meditation practice. But we can make some progress. And Alan Wallace said it was up through about the third or fourth level, I think, that you could go. And then to get to the fourth level, you probably would need a better environment that's more conducive for calm abiding. But then he goes on to say, whether in retreat or not, your progress depends on choosing one particular object of concentration and staying with it consistently. Whoops. So this is the whole point again of why we looked at objects of concentration, is that you want to find an object that is suitable for you, one that works for you. And one thing I might emphasize once more is that we do have a variety of objects. Anything really can be used as an object, but it has to be an internal object, meaning that at some point it has to go into the sphere of it just being something that our mental consciousness is aware of. It's not the tactile sensation of the breath and so on. And recall that I shared instruction that Alan Wallace gives about how this tactile sensation of the breath, for example, at the nose, actually becomes a mental object at some point naturally. It's an acquired sign that occurs. But know that, again, this is a main quality, that we want an internal object that we can stay with, that we feel comfortable with, that works for us. Now, by saying comfortable with, we mean one that you don't feel like you're using causing undue stress in the mind by meditating on that. As I mentioned earlier, if you meditate on the image of a Buddha, that means you have to put all your energy into conjuring up that image, at least initially, to have, until you have greater familiarity with it, you can't really have mindfulness of it so much. So there is that obstacle to get through, but it can be a wonderful object to use. The advice that I believe I mentioned earlier, that is highlighted in many of the texts, is if you have a guru, somebody who you feel confident has greater ability to know your mind and what would be a conducive object for you, go to them for advice. Say, I would really like to have an object that I can begin my process of developing calm abiding, and see what they say. And essentially, if they know you very well, and they should know you very well, then they will have good advice for you. They'll give you an object that you feel quite confident in, then, because it was given to you by your guru. You can feel great joy that you're fulfilling your guru's wishes by, using that object, and so on. So that's another little aspect of this that I thought I would just throw in. So in terms of the process, I put them on your chart in this way because from bottom to top, so that you actually progress through these stages of development in this upward column on the left. And then that's because that mirrors what is in this diagram that many of you have seen. It's a little thing that's used in this practice of developing calm abiding in the Tibetan tradition. I'm sure it was used previously in the Indian tradition, but nonetheless, it's this little pathway where the practitioner goes through these different bends of the road and continues upward, and eventually develops calm abiding and goes on to unite that calm abiding with special insight. So I'm going to go through each of these stages, but before we go through the stages and kind of get an idea for the refinement of the mind that happens as one progresses towards calm abiding, I wanted to talk a little bit about some factors that are correlated with this. These 9 stages are correlated to 6 powers on your chart that you have in your handout. They're on the left-hand side. The stages are in the middle. The 6 powers are the 6 capacities that a meditator needs to achieve calm abiding. And we can say that each of these factors come to fruition as one proceeds through the 9 stages. And I'm going to show you where those occur and when we go through each of the individual stages. So it's not to say, again, that they aren't present on the other levels. As it says there, the stages with which the 6 powers are related refer to when they matter most. So it's not to say that they cannot be present at other times. Rather, it's kind of which one will be the one that you are mainly relying upon, mainly depending upon when you are at that particular level. These 6 powers are the power of hearing, thinking, mindfulness, introspection, the power of effort, and then the power of familiarity. So we're going to see those as we go through, and I'll review them at the end as well, just so we kind of see how they fit in. They are also subsumed within what are called 4 mental engagements. The 4, we could also call these attentions. It's the same word. The mental factor of attention is also translated often as mental engagement. Attention is that ability to kind of pay attention to a particular specific object. It's the holding to that object to some degree. It's not the same as mindfulness. It's the actual attention that is cognizant of the aspects of that object. And so these are 4 ways in which the meditator's mind relates to their object of observation. And they include the levels of attention that are operative throughout the 9 stages. And they start with forced mental engagement, because we have to force the mind to be on the object. And then it becomes interrupted, meaning that we will be with the object, but it will be interrupted at times by not being with the object. And then we will have a uninterrupted mental attention or mental engagement, where we are with the object, but it's never interrupted. And then we finally have it being spontaneous, which is when we are able to just immediately go right into our meditation without any great effort. So anyway, this is the refinement that we see in the mind in terms of this factor of attention. On your chart, it's on the right-hand side of the central column where the 9 stages are set out. So I'm going to be correlating them with this wonderful image that is used, and I found online some little bits of it that are smaller boxes that are really quite nice, that allow you to explain more clearly how they correlate to the chart. This is just so that you do have some awareness of this chart and could even use it as a way of remembering the stages of development of the mind. The elephant that is being guided, you can see it in the chart there on the right-hand side. It starts off being very much encompassed by a darker color, and then it goes eventually to being completely white by the time it gets to the top. And it is the mind of the meditator. The elephant represents your own mind. The black color is representing the laxity, that darkness, that dullness. So that is why, again, it diminishes over time. The elephant eventually has no darker color to it, because the laxity is eventually removed. Why is an elephant used? Because an elephant can be very destructive. I've heard all these stories about elephants charging through towns in India and other parts of the world where they do great destruction. If they're tamed, however, though, they can be used for all sorts of useful things. So essentially, again, that's the reason why an elephant is chosen. Even though we sometimes talk about having a monkey mind, the monkey is not our mind. The monkey that is in this diagram in various places is representing distraction. So that's what is sometimes pulling our mind, leading our mind, is the distraction that we have. And the darker color to it means this, specifically the distraction that is excitement. As I said earlier, excitement is a form of attachment, being drawn towards attractive objects, whereas distraction can be a variety of things. You can have distraction that's about unattractive objects, thinking about how unpleasant the sound is that, the music that your neighbor's playing is, or whatever the case might be. We can have a lot of things that distract the mind. The black color is representing that factor of excitement. That darkness disappears as we progress in an upward fashion through this path to attaining calm abiding. A rabbit is not there at the very beginning, but you're going to see the rabbit appear at the 3rd level, and that's because at the 3rd level is where you are actually able to discern subtle laxity from grosser laxity. So the rabbit represents those subtle aspects of laxity, so you'll see that appear. These other factors, the monk who is kind of guiding the elephant eventually, but is chasing the elephant in the beginning, represents the meditator, you, the meditator. So while the mind of you, the meditator, is the elephant, the meditator is the person who is intending to move in the direction of attaining calm abiding. That meditator uses 2 tools on the elephant of the mind to make it settle and to make it more serviceable. The rope, which is the rope that he puts around the elephant's neck to be able to tie it, to keep it more focused and in one place. That's the rope of mindfulness. And the goad, or the hook, which isn't a pleasant thing to talk about, because when you actually see these things being used on elephants, it's quite painful, for them. But we need an introspection that sort of checks in, that kind of sees what's going on and has a bit of that kind of, sharper awareness, a goat or a hook isn't, in my mind, the best thing to represent this, but it is that factor, as we discussed earlier, that keeps an eye on what's happening, that then allows us to be more in control, to keep our mindfulness of the object and so on. What else will you see in this chart? And I'm going to maybe toggle to another slide to go through some of these. First, you're going to see flames in different places. As you go through to the upward parts of it, the flames are lesser, whereas in the bottom part, the flames are greater. This demonstrates the amount of effort that you need. We're also going to go to that other one and show you the 5 sense objects, which of course are what often are taking us off of our object of observation, getting caught up in those, or our memories of those, our thoughts of those, our desire for those. There's also a monkey eating fruit in a tree, which is, I've got my little arrow here, my cursor. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of right there to the left, about midway on the left-hand side, all the way at the border. That's a monkey eating fruit in a tree, which essentially represents what we should do between sessions, not eat fruit in a tree, but we should engage in virtuous activities that support our practice, but are not the main focus of what we're doing. So that might be, prostrations or reciting other texts or whatever. We don't want those to interfere with our meditation, but we want to engage in virtue outside of meditation, outside of our time on the cushion. And there are 6 bends in the road. The first bend is way at the bottom where, the road starts. You see it curves to the left, then it curves back to the right, then it curves to the left, back to the right, to the left, and then the final curve just to the right towards the top. So let me show you these on another slide. That'll give you a bit better idea, because again, that one is very, very small. So here again, we do see that this starts off with the bend in the road here at the very bottom, where the meditator is getting onto the road. He's sort of chasing the elephant of the mind, and there's a great amount of fire down here because much more effort is needed to keep the mind on the object. We have the second bend in the road, representing the second power. The first power was hearing, the second power is thinking. We have a little bit diminishment of the fire, but still quite amount of fire, keeping the mind focused. And then, of course, that is the second stage that happens there. The elephant still quite ahead of the meditator. And the fire diminishes a little bit more, but is still quite strong. And the practitioner then has a bit more control over the mind. The fire diminishes. You'll notice that right down here underneath that third level of the road, there are some delightful things there. That's actually food, that's to the left, and cloth, that's to the right. Those represent the objects of taste and touch. Then when you go up above the third bend, or the third line in the road here, third level of the road, you'll see symbols, which represents the objects of hearing, a conch shell filled with nectar, which represents, with perfume, that represents the objects of odor or smell. And then above that fourth level of the road, you see a mirror. This is actually supposed to be a mirror. It almost looks like a Dharma wheel. It's a mirror that represents objects for the eyes, the visual objects that appear in a mirror. Anyway, so again, know that the fires diminish as you go through this. There's the monkey in the tree off to the left there. Eventually you get up here and there's no more effort required. There's nothing that gets you great effort. There's a very tiny amount of effort required to get you to the 7th. And then once you get to the 8th, you don't need hardly any effort. And then 9th, you don't need any effort at all. And then you end up at the top. And I'll explain all of these things, but I just wanted to give you a bit clearer representation of, again, the 5 sense objects, the diminishment of the flames as we go further up so that we have less effort required. Okay, let's go back to the slides and we'll go through these and kind of explain them in brief. I don't want to go into great depth because you can find instructions in almost every Lam-Rim text on them. The very first one is called placing the mind. Through the power of your hearing, having heard the instructions on meditation, calm abiding, and having heard also the description of the object you're going to observe and whatever from your Lama, or whatever it is that has kind of got you into that place of beginning your practice, the mind is only on the object for a short time here. This is the stage we all go through at the beginning, right? We meditate very briefly on the breath or whatever object we're focused on. Most of the time, we're not there. So there's no real continuity of placement. The continuity is more in the realm of distraction or, dullness. Initially, the mind seems to be increasing in distraction, but this is simply due to seeing the extent of the mind's distraction for the first time. When you actually stop and look at the mind, it seems like there's a whole party going on in there, but the party has always been going on in there. You know, it's just that you're now aware of the party happening in your own mind. So in terms of that first stage, when the meditator begins through that first bend, through the power of hearing, we see that again, the meditator and the mind are in kind of two different places. The meditator wants to control the mind and has the two tools of the rope of mindfulness and the goad of introspection, but is simply not capable of using them. Why? Because the mind is full of laxity, with that dark color to the elephant, but is also being led by the monkey of excitement. Again, that monkey has the ability to take us completely in directions that we don't want to, and that's what's often happening when we initially sit down in meditation. The monkey and the elephant are both pretty wild, out of control at this stage. The second stage is what's called placement with continuity. So we actually do have a greater continuity now. And this is through the power of thinking, through our having spent some time in conceptual thought, looking at the instructions that we've been given, reflecting deeply about what this will do to help us, the benefits we'll have from calm abiding and so on. That feeds that development on the second level. The qualities of the second level is that the mind is on the object for longer periods of time, and one actually then lengthens the continuity of placement. So we are able to actually stay present with the breath for a greater amount of time. There are different advice about how long we're talking about here in terms of time. I'd say at this point, you're probably able to do a couple of minutes, and that's generally in the neighborhood of what different teachers say. They do sometimes say different things. So if you're able to stay on them for a couple of minutes and then an interruption occurs, that's pretty good. Interruptions still exceed concentration, but there are gaps in the tendency for interruption that allow the mind to have temporary stillness. You do have more continuity of placement on the object because of that strength of concentration you've developed. So this is on the second level. So you've gone around that next bend and you have the influence of the power of thinking. The meditator, once more, is still behind the elephant and the monkey, but you notice they're walking a little more casually now. They're not running, you're not chasing them, and they're not paying attention yet to the meditator. But nonetheless, they are a bit closer to the meditator and not so out of control. So notice that there's just a very slight increase of the darker color. In this one, the elephant is sort of a blackish tone, but the monkey is sort of brown. But you'll notice that at the crown of the head of the elephant and the monkey, there's a little bit of white showing. That means that we've begun to control those factors of laxity and excitement just a little bit by virtue of increasing our concentration and staying placed on the object. Okay, so we have a little bit of peace of mind at this juncture, but really not a whole lot more going on, bit more continuity. Now we have what's called patch-like placement. And this is where we begin the power of mindfulness, which is going to be the most important power for this level and the next level, the fourth level. Remember, mindfulness is that non-forgetfulness of the object. So here, whenever the mind is distracted, concentration on the object can be quickly reestablished. You've been doing enough meditation to where you get distracted, but you notice it rather quickly and are able to retain your mindfulness or restore your mindfulness of the object. Like putting a patch on cloth, the mind is returned to its continuum of concentration by immediate recognition of the distraction. That's why it's called patch-like placement. You sort of patch up that gap. You will have a gap occurring still when the mind gets distracted, but you patch it up very easily. So the length of periods of distraction is much shorter than it was on the second level, whereas that was still more than what you were on the object. Now the distraction is becoming less frequent and less shorter duration. So here we've made the third bend. We are now dealing with this power of mindfulness. You'll notice that the mindfulness, the rope, is attached to the mind of the elephant, or elephant mind. And the elephant and the monkey are both looking back towards the meditator. And you might, again, see the change in the color. The heads of both of them are now white as opposed to the darker color that represents the excitement and the laxity. But you also notice that rabbit has appeared. The rabbit that is on top of the elephant represents the subtle laxity, again, those subtler aspects that are keeping the mind from having an intensity as opposed to just the clarity that is lacking with the grosser forms of laxity. So it's at this point, they say, in this third stage, that one is actually able to discern the difference between those two. Prior to that, one was only seeing the grosser form of laxity, and the subtler laxity wasn't really noticeable. So now you can see that. And again, I don't know why it's represented by a rabbit, but nonetheless. But it does seem that there's already some diminishment to subtle laxity because the rabbit has a white head. So it's not to say that you've, just see it and it's overtaking you, but rather you are seeing it and you're also able to counteract it to some degree. Maybe that's enough to say about that. We go on to close placement, the fourth level. Here we still have the power of mindfulness, but with strong effort, the mind is placed closely on the object, which due to powerful mindfulness now cannot be lost. They say from the fourth level on, you never really lose the object. You might have those subtler forms of laxity or excitement, but you don't really lose the object. You stay present with the object through the duration of your session. Venerable Rene Fusi, who is a monk in our tradition, has done these longer retreats. And he says, when you get to this fourth level, you're experiencing an unbelievable peace of mind and a bliss and happiness that you've never experienced. It's already pretty amazing because of this ability to stay with the object without any distraction. The mind is drawn inward, and the sense of separation of the meditating mind from the object diminishes. This is one of the qualities that happens as you deepen your meditation, is that there's not that duality of object that is meditated on and the mind that is meditating on the object. Subject objects seem to begin to diminish in terms of that sense of separation. It's not that they actually become one, but there's less of that quality of separation. Gross laxity and excitement do still occur, though, so the opponents to them must be practiced. So again, even though you're on the object, it does seem that at times those will arise, but you have the ability to very quickly notice them and practice the opponents to them. So in this way, you maintain this close placement on the object, that keeps you together with the object through that time. So this is signified on that chart by the meditator being there much more in proximity to the mind having changed color to a larger degree. All three animals representing our excitement, our laxity, and our subtle laxity, that part of it has diminished. So the meditator is beginning to raise the goad, just kind of showing that at this point, when we go around the next bend, we're going to be using the power of introspection to a greater degree. But you'll see that, again, the mindfulness is held there very tightly. Controlling, the fifth level, by knowing through experience the disadvantages of laxity and excitement, and by making further effort, those faults are controlled with strong introspection. So that's what we mean by controlling, is that through the force of this introspection, we control the mind very much. Again, it's not to say that introspection is going to be there more present. It's just the more important one here, because we need that introspection, especially to detect the subtler forms of laxity, though even subtle excitement could still arise. And that is, as it says in the second bullet point, due to the withdrawing that happens on the fourth stage and that lack of separation between subject and object, there's a danger of subtle laxity, kind of losing that energy and that intensity. And with introspection, antidotes to that obstacle are applied. You heighten the mind at that point and you keep it from having that problem. So that's what's going on at the fifth level of controlling, or sometimes called disciplining. The how it's signified in terms of the graphic is that, again, the meditator's now out in front with the goad controlling the mind. So he had raised the goad. The rope of mindfulness is obviously still there, holding the elephant in place, keeping it on the object. But we need that introspection as a tool to see what is happening especially at a subtler level, because that's mostly what's occurring here, is these subtler forms of the laxity and so on. Pacifying. This is through the power of introspection as well. Due to the effort used to subdue subtle laxity on the fifth stage, the mind can become invigorated. So the main obstacle here that arises that needs to still require some introspection is subtle excitement, because when we heighten the mind due to that subtle laxity, it might induce some of that subtle excitement, that current of thought that's just underneath the ice of watching the object. Since subtle laxity doesn't arise with any great danger, powerful introspection is used primarily to identify and counter our subtle laxity or excitement, which again is to bring the mind down a bit when we do have that thought that's occurring in a more subliminal way, not quite so gross. So this is signified by this part of the graphic up on that level where, again, you've got the meditator still in front, no longer kind of threatening as much with the goad, but still having it raised, meaning we still have introspection. The rope is very lax, right? Because there's no longer kind of a heightened sense of mindfulness, but the mindfulness is still present. You'll notice that the rabbit's gone. No more rabbit. That's because subtle laxity is no longer an issue. Instead, we just have the diminishing laxity and excitement on the part of the elephant and the monkey. But again, these wouldn't be major factors at that point. They're not anything that you would need to have great concern over. Thorough pacifying. This is through now the power of effort, the fifth of the six powers. Due to the strength of mindfulness and introspection that we've developed on those previous stages, it's difficult for any laxity or excitement to arise. When they do arise, they are overcome through effort. Venerable Rene, he says, it's like, you just go poof and they're gone, poof and they're gone. You kind of have this ability through your effort to just immediately dispel any of these things that even come close to arising. So you've already developed the mind to a great degree here in the seventh stage. This is signified by this very peaceful looking thing in the seventh part of this graphic, this image. The mind there is almost completely white, right? There's just a little bit of darkness around the legs of the elephant. The elephant doesn't need to be held by the rope anymore or threatened with the introspection. It's already present. So it doesn't mean that because the rope isn't there that you don't have any mindfulness present. It means that it's completely mindful. The mind doesn't need to have that rope that is sort of reminding it. Rather, it's already present with the quality of the mind in observing the object. And you notice the monkeys at the bottom of the screen in the center there, also completely white, meaning gone. We don't have any of that excitement arising. I think actually in the bottom of there, you might be a little bit on the bottom in the previous graphic. This cut it off right there. But essentially, again, that subtle excitement is pretty much all that would have arisen. And that was pretty much quelled by the sixth stage. So we don't really have too much to worry about with regard to either of these. And the meditator's looking much more at peace, right? Okay, finish these up and then we'll conclude today. Making one pointed, the eighth stage. This is where meditation on the object now occurs without any interruption from laxity or excitement for the full session. So sounds wonderful, right? Don't have to worry about these at all. Slight effort and mindfulness and introspection are needed at the very beginning of a session to ensure that they don't arise, but then you're able to hold the object continuously. This is a one-pointedness of the mind that is already, again, very powerful, but it requires some effort to get into that, initializing it with some level of mindfulness and introspection, but then you coast, you just go straight on through. So again, there's not much to say about this graphic. It looks, very, very peaceful. You'll notice the monkey is no longer there. We no longer have that distraction as a factor. The elephant's entirely white now, meaning that the mind is free of all laxity, and of course is free of excitement, distraction, because the monkey is gone. Now we go on to the final of the 9 stages prior to attaining calm abiding, placement with equanimity. This is the final power, the power of familiarity. It's at that last bend in the road where the meditator is capable to have this effortless concentration on the object, and it can be continued for any length of time. This is approximating our calm abiding in terms of those qualities, but it hasn't yet attained it. But through constant familiarity with single pointedness gained by practicing with effort repeatedly on the 8th stage, concentration can be generated spontaneously and maintained without effort. So we will eventually get to that place where we don't need any real effort. We just go into it and we hang out for as long as we wish, meditating on whatever virtuous object we choose. Again, or with the object of observation that we've been using. This is signified by both the elephant and the meditator, sort of lying down, sitting down, so that we have that sort of restfulness quality to it, where there's no longer any real effort required. Again, the elephant's completely under the control of the meditator now. So we have complete control over our mind. And you think, well, where do we go from there? It doesn't seem like we need to do anything more. However, we have to develop pliancy, which we'll get into at the beginning of next week. So again, this is the recap of the 6 powers. You see them on your chart as well. We end up with the power of familiarity through the previous powers. That's at the 9th stage. Does require some effort, though very minimal at the 7th and 8th, but all the other factors are fully developed. We need primarily introspection on those 5th and 6th, and primarily mindfulness on the 3rd and 4th to kind of get us to that place where we can maintain mindfulness of the object in the 4th stage. And then thinking and hearing, as I pointed out, are important on those first 2. The 4 mental engagements, you have spontaneous engagement with the object, that attention that happens spontaneously only on the 9th level, and you have it being completely uninterrupted on the 8th level. Some level of interruption is involved in the 3rd through the 7th. It's more interruption earlier on and then less interruption later on. And then forced engagement, forced attention in the first 2 stages, which makes sense, right? Because that's where you're really struggling. You need a lot of effort, a lot of force to get you to stay on the object. Okay, so that's where we're going to stop, and we're going to come back next week. I was hoping to get to calm abiding, but it's okay to leave it at that, because calm abiding itself is an interesting little process to look at and to kind of see, how we actually are able to accomplish that, and what are the signs of that? What is it that actually occurs when you attain that? Because there are meditators who mistake that 9th level for having calm abiding, because the mind is very, very focused, right? It seems like it's entirely serviceable, but there's still some coarser elements that need to be removed. There is a comment about walking meditation, doing mantra as you walk, when you walk, when you're hiking, doing whatever. Absolutely. And this is where, again, doing virtuous activities outside of meditation, and even if you're on retreat, to recite mantra, when you're walking, to recite mantra, for animals, beings to hear, but if they aren't there, at least for you to practice with those mantras. Mantra literally means mind protection, and so it's a really good way to kind of keep our mind in the Dharma. I often, when I used to drive a lot, I don't drive much now with the pandemic, I would recite mantra in the car. Just a really good way, I think, too, to stay focused in the car. So any final comments or questions on anything we've talked about today? I realize it was a lot of information. I hope the graphics did help break it up a little bit. Get to see cute little animals and stuff. So now you have some idea. Again, there is like one version of that chart that you often see in black and white with a bunch of numbers on it that indicate all the various things that are involved. And I didn't go through to that level of detail, but know that there are guides that show all of that, that demonstrate, what all the various things are involved in that graphic. But we haven't quite finished the graphic because we got the guy in the cave, right, with the elephant. We have to go on to develop calm abiding, and then to unite that calm abiding with special insight, which is what we're going to do as well in looking at the perfection of wisdom in the next part of this course, the final part of this course. So I don't see any other questions, so maybe we can go ahead and conclude today. So all right, good. Thank you for your comments in the box. Appreciate those. So let's bring to mind all those beings that are on the dedication list. We won't recite their names today, but we will be reciting them at pujas, events at TNL. Especially this month, we do have a wonderful holy day coming up with Chotrul Duchen, as well as Losar, and the days between Losar and that day are very auspicious for practice. But just know that, again, we're keeping these beings in mind as the objects that we want most to benefit from this. We want all beings to benefit from what we've we've done today. But because we have a karmic connection with those beings who are on the prayer list or who we are holding in our hearts right now, we can think about them very strongly, receiving the benefits of what we've done today so that their suffering is eliminated immediately and they have all the causes and conditions that bring them to true peace and happiness. And let's recite these words and extend that thought then to all beings being benefited by what we've done here today. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. And this wonderful verse, as you recite this, bring to mind this very courageous attitude of the Bodhisattva that we're exploring through these 6 perfections, that is intent upon helping beings no matter what it takes. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Then we dedicate for the good health and long lives of our precious teachers as we recite these prayers that are specific for His Holiness, for Lama Zopa, and then for Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, Osalhita. Then bring to mind all beings who are in that role as spiritual guide, for ourselves and others. May all of these guides have good health and long lives so that we and others will be benefited by their presence in all our lifetimes. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Wonderful. Thank you, Mary, for your help with that. Thank you all for being here today, and I hope this was useful. I know it gets down into some nitty-gritty kind of stuff and may seem like it's way beyond where we're at now, but that's okay. We'll get there. That's the whole reason for going through this, is to feel some inspiration to move in that direction, to want to achieve these states. So I hope that you're able to work with your meditation over the next week with some mindfulness of some of what we've talked about, and we'll reconvene next week to continue looking at this. So everyone, please stay safe and healthy. I'll see you again soon.